You will have heard about Kathy, I hope, from other press that there has been since she came to the UK to launch her book, and she's going to speak about her case, her experiences when she worked in Bosnia, and the consequences for her and her life of having the courage to expose the involvement of US, UN and other international forces in the trafficking of women and children and the use of those women and children in prostitution. The issues that Kathy's case raise are many and numerous. They are all very important. It was difficult to choose a theme for this meeting because the trafficking issues are obviously serious and very important. The problems related to human trafficking of women and girls is ongoing, and I'm sure that that will be part of the message that Kathy gives you tonight, is that the issues that so stirred her to expose herself really to obviously being dismissed, end of her career, significant detriment in her personal and private life, are what motivated her, and they're still ongoing, and they're what motivated her, I think, probably to stick in there, write this book, get the film producers interested in her film, and keep that issue alive. Mr. Pascal, you won't have had any advance notice that he was going to speak. He is going to speak about his experiences in the UK. He was a civil servant for 25 years and exposed in the media the complicity of British forces in extraordinary rendition. And he's going to talk about the impact that's had on his life, which is ongoing, for having, again, the courage of his convictions to stand up and identify abuses within our own government and explain what have been the consequences for him. Karen Bailey, it was the solicitor who worked with me on Kathy's case. So we're here if anyone has any questions about the legal proceedings. This is not intended to be a lecture about the law on whistleblowing. Our concern, which I hope many people share here, is that there is plainly inadequate protection for whistleblowers, whether that's in the context of employment, whether it's in the context of people who raise issues about national security concerns and therefore face prosecution under the Official Secrets Act. There is clear lack of legal protection for these people, and it's that, in a way, that is what we want to take away from this meeting, is how we might think about better protection for people who do identify and cannot sit by and watch abuses take place, because if there was better protection, then we might have better disclosures, we might know more about the human rights violations and the abuses that governments and non-governmental organisations commit. And it couldn't be more a compelling context when you have a situation where, at the moment, we've got the Chilcot inquiry into the illegal war. Well, I've come to the conclusion for them already. What we all know what was an illegal war. We cannot have the information of the exchanges of correspondence between Bush and Blair when Blair committed this country to war. We can't have that disclosed to us, and it's obviously going to be in that kind of climate where people who know that not only were the illegalities or abuses taking place, but there's dissembling and lying about the true picture, people are inevitably going to have to be forced to make the choice between their own careers, their own livelihoods, their own futures, and having out there in the public domain information about how governments and non-government organisations act in our name. So that's the context. Simon Israeli is going to come and talk about the implications for press freedom. He's hot-footing from his studio where they're recording the Channel 4 News, so he won't be here until a little bit later. We want it to be a debate, we want it to be a discussion, and mainly we want it to be an opportunity for the people who have had that courage to stand up and be counted, to let them hear their stories, because they really speak for themselves. So Kathy is going to speak first.
Thank you. Do you want me to stand here or just talk?
What would you feel better doing?
feel better just doing this. Can
Yeah.
everybody hear me okay? Stephanie, thank you, and Karen for doing this for me, first of all. I mean, you have no idea how much their support meant. They really, truly were my saviors in all this, and had it not been for them, I'm not sure what had happened. But I think I'd like to start, kind of work my way backwards, because Stephanie touched on something about trying to get more people to speak out, and if more people would come forward and start being able to do that, that it would, possibly change the way we do things. And I remember so clearly after I won my case, talking to the press about that and asking, the message you have to give to people, and that is, yes, speak out. There is justice, and this, you can make a change. But unfortunately today, when I'm asked that same question by journalists, and in fact I had it posed to me today, really what changes have been made. And afterward I got to thinking about it, and it was kind of a sidebar after my interview, and I realized I have to tell journalists now that I really can't recommend that people do that, because it is so hard, and you really better have a really good attorney in your back pocket before you start speaking out. You better have all your ducks in a row, and your documentation, your facts, and you really better be prepared to lose your job, to lose your career, to lose your financial savings, to lose your retirement, because you will be discredited, and they'll do everything they can to harm you. And I think that's the main thing that has really caused me the rage of knowing that still my own government and the company who did this to me in the end got away with it. Really, they got away with it, even though there's been so much press out there, and the fact that nothing has really changed in the past 10 years. And so even though all this publicity is taking place and we won our trial, it was just really a basic slap on the wrist to this company and to the corporations out there who still continue to do this. With that, how this all started, I don't want to ruin the book for everybody, so I don't want to go through step by step. It is a very quick read, and I think that it's something that I really did as a therapy to get myself over the hump, so to speak, after this was over. I was approached by some movie folks who encouraged me to write a book. They wanted to make a movie, and I actually worked to write the book from the documents and the case files that I handed over to Karen and Stephanie for trial. So it was all fresh in my memory, and it was probably one of the hardest things I've ever done, and I hoped that would be my therapy. I put it away on a shelf for a few years, and then decided to go ahead and try and get it published as the movie got closer to being actually produced the past couple of years. So Paul Grave McMillan, a wonderful publisher, came forward, and that's how that actually came to fruition in the last few years. It's been a really hard 10 years. It started in 12 years, actually, because it started in 1999. I was a police officer in Lincoln, Nebraska, had been there about 10 years. I started my career late in my life. I was, I think, 28 years old before I became a police officer. I'd also worked in the private sector before that time, in the insurance companies and hotel industry, and was a mother of 3 before I ever decided to become a police officer. I had 3 kids before I was 24 years old. I dropped out of college to marry my high school sweetheart, and continued my college education then through night school and weekends. Went to the police academy, and loved my job. I was a good police officer, became a detective, worked on child sex crimes and sexual abuse cases. And then 10 years later, after divorcing my first husband, started then to look for something different. I'd gone through a second marriage and divorce, and that's when the flyer came along for this wonderful international company representing the U.S. State Department in the United Nations to recruit and send officers over to represent the United States at the United Nations. So that sounded like a great challenge, good way to make some tax-free dollars and support my kids as they grew up and went to college, and went off with every hope that this was something that was going to be a great opportunity for me and a really good learning experience. Almost immediately, I found the company that had recruited me, DynCorp, was not what they pretended to be. They really were so mismanaged, and there were so many incidents taking place right from the start that gave me some red flags. one gentleman made comments poolside one evening as we sat around having a beer after one of our training sessions that he knew where to find really nice 12 to 15-year-olds. And it just, I kind of buried that statement and that thought and hung on to it. And as I moved forward then into Bosnia, once we got into Sarajevo, after about 6 months, I was assigned to work specifically in human rights and working in sexual violence cases and gender issues with women and children. Somehow I always wound up getting put into those type of positions. And unfortunately in the UN, I think it was women mostly who wound up in those positions for obvious reasons, because the men generally just didn't want to, number one, do the investigation part, but two, they just weren't trained in how to talk to victims and how to talk to women on certain issues. So the expertise that women, I guess, have on both a natural basis and the extra training that I had as a police detective in those fields came in pretty handy in Bosnia as well. So like I said, there's story after story that I outline in the book that kind of built up this whole, built up the whole case against not only DynCorp, the company who was involved in much of the use of the women in brothels, because many of the internationals there from all the different countries, especially the Ukraine and Romania, were actually part of their police forces or also part of the mafia in those countries. So they were actually the ones who were the most involved in bringing women across borders and taking part in those kind of things. But civilians, military, international police, these brothels were just all over the place, and it was something that I went into with rather a naive, I think, attitude coming from Midwest United States, farm country, ranch country. That kind of stuff didn't exist there. You didn't see that. That was only in Las Vegas. So it was really interesting to kind of see this kind of atmosphere and mentality that was taking place in this East European country. And I still didn't really realize the scope of what I had gotten myself into until a case came along where it was clear that international police were being implicated. Photographs, videotapes, identification, names, tattoos, everything. And every time I would document all these different incidents and pass them on, and they would ultimately be trash canned, somehow lost in the shuffle, and just case after case, this continued. Pretty soon I started making files of everything and copies of things that involved internationals, and eventually then became so disgusted that I really had to do a bit more. And the more I reached out to my managers, both in DynCorp and through the UN channels, the more pushback, not only I, but all of my fellow officers who were involved in human rights investigations and who are also involved in these human trafficking investigations, were really discredited, told we were zealots. Basically, it's time to stop these investigations. Don't worry about it. They're just prostitutes. Clearly, that didn't set very well with me. And at one point in time, then I wrote an email and disclosed to the entire mission, practically about 50 people, from the head of the mission on down to clerical women in the field, my thoughts, my feelings, and gave the examples of the types of cases that were coming across my desk and that were not being acted on properly, and talked a little bit about the sexist attitude that generally existed throughout the entire mission, from the head office on down. It was really, in fact, I think, as I'll recall, I mean, one of my complaints to Stephanie and Karen was that I wanted to also file a sexual harassment suit. We eventually dropped that part to make the rest of it stronger. But to me, that was really almost the top issue, the way that I personally was treated throughout that mission. So this went on. I was demoted from my position after several months of complaining, and then eventually terminated with cause. Actually, had they probably terminated me without cause, maybe they would have gotten away with it. But they chose to say I falsified my timesheets, which clearly I knew I had not done.